But we're going to do a series called Through Their Eyes. And we're going to be looking at the Christmas story through the eyes of many different people that were involved that you don't typically see their perspective from. And so I'm really excited about that. And I was planning to start it today, but the staff had a violent reaction. They said, Joe, you can't start a Christmas series and skip Thanksgiving. Yeah, I see it. They're like, that's my favorite holiday. So how many of you know Thanksgiving is Thursday, everybody? Ready or not? Here we go. Hope you get some food and some football in Jesus' name. And be grateful for all kinds of things. So we're going to do a little standalone one-off message this morning about the story of a powerful invitation. And as we get started, I was actually in the interest meeting. For those of you that didn't catch the announcement, Pastor Josh and Katie Clark, we are sending them to Clarksville, Tennessee, where they're going to start Manna Church Clarksville in the fall of 2026. And last Sunday night, we had an interest meeting for anybody from this Manna Church who would be interested in moving their entire families to Clarksville to be a part of this team. There's a bunch of people showed up in that room. It's absolutely amazing what God is doing. And Josh shared a story with me that I had forgotten about. A story from the first day of Manna Church, Colorado Springs, almost 8 years ago. I wanted to share it with you because it illustrates the power a single invitation can have. See, in the weeks leading up to the launch of Manna Church, Mike's life had completely fallen apart. His wife had asked for a divorce, and subsequently he was battling a deep depression. Now, just days before our grand opening Sunday, Mike had gotten so desperate that he'd gotten to the point that he was ready to take his own life. He had actually already developed the plan and had it ready to go. It just so happened on the day that he was developing his plan to take his own life, he received an invitation in the mail. Just this little flyer that came without him looking for it, without him asking for it. And it just so happened to be an invitation to Manna Church. In fact, I got a picture of what that mailer, that invitation mailer looked like from the beginning. We'll throw it up on the screens right behind me. So this is what it looked like. On the front, it just said this big piece front. It said, this piece of mail could change your life forever. Come on, somebody. How many of you know that's a pretty bold claim to make about a mailer? Like, this 5-cent piece of mail is going to change your life. Now you flip it over on the other side and say, of course that's ridiculous. A random piece of mail can't change your life, but we are excited to introduce to you something that can. And it has an invitation to Manna Church, the grand opening Sunday. And so Mike just decided, he looked at that mail, felt like, man, that's a coincidence. Like, that's a little bit scary. And so he says, you know what? Let me give this thing one last shot. And if nothing happens, then I'll take my life. And so Mike showed up to the grand opening Sunday of Manna Church, braved the snow. Anybody remember that? Guys, we had a blizzard on the opening Sunday of Manna Church. That's what you get for starting a church in January in Colorado. Didn't think that one through. And he showed up, braved the snow, came in. He was desperate for something, desperate for hope, desperate for an answer. And he said in that service, as I preach the good news of who Jesus is and how Jesus redeems that which has been lost, how he gives new life to those whose lives feel broken, that there's a fresh start available in him. And Mike was one of 43 people who raised their hand and made a decision to give their life to Jesus on our grand opening Sunday. Incredible. And what happened for Mike is that his life began to be transformed. All of a sudden, where he was hopeless, he was filled with hope. And so he came back the next week, and the next week, and the week after that, and he made Manna Church his home church. He started meeting with Pastor Josh, who would take him to coffee, and they would talk about life and Jesus, and started reading his Bible, and started being involved. And in fact, he ended up joining the surf team. He was so impacted, and God was doing so much in his life that he felt like, man, I gotta do something so that other people in this city can experience what I've experienced. He joined the surf team. He brought his 2 young boys with him. They began to serve coffee each Sunday morning. Now, as it goes, Mike was in the military. He was an officer in the Air Force. And so the Air Force moved him away. And not too long ago, Pastor Josh got to connect with Mike. He saw him again. And Mike pulled him aside and he said, Josh, you have no idea how much of a difference Manna Church has made in my life. Now, unfortunately for his marriage, even though God transformed his life, it was too little too late for his marriage. And he did end up losing his marriage. But God began to work in his heart. And by this time that he met him, he had gotten remarried. He had found a godly woman, made her his wife. They had been in Georgia, now serving at a great church. And he went to Pastor Josh and he thanked him. He said, thank you for being a part of a church that showed up for me when I needed it most. Church, it's the power of an invitation. Oftentimes we don't realize how much of a difference a simple invitation can make. This morning, what I want to do is I want to look at one of the most significant invitations recorded in the Old Testament. It's a story you may have never even heard of this guy's name in your life, and that's okay. It's hard to pronounce. I might mispronounce it even as we go about this message. But I want to tell you something, church. This story is a picture of what God has done for you and me. In fact, the title of the message today is Invited to the Table. Somebody say, invited to the table. I just want you to know that you have been invited to the table. If you got your Bibles with you, we're going to start in 2 Samuel chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. It'll be in your handouts. It'll be on the screens behind me. And here's what it says. It says, and David, this is King David, said, is there still anyone left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. And they called him to David. And the king said to him, are you Ziba? And he said, I'm your servant. And the king said, is there not still someone of the house of Saul that I may show the kindness of God to him? And Ziba said to the king, there is still a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in his feet. And the king said to him, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel at Lodabar. Now let me explain what's happening right here. We just jumped into the middle of the story, in the middle of the Old Testament. Let me explain what's taken place. King Saul, was the king of all Israel. In fact, he was the first king of Israel that God had anointed and appointed to lead the people of Israel. Only problem is that Saul had made many different mistakes in his journey as a king. Chief among them was his pride, and then his desire to fall in love with the power of authority that he did not deserve in the first place. And so because of the pride and falling in love with this power, he began to be disobedient to God, and his heart went after power instead of after the things of God. And so God actually decided, I tell you what I'm going to do. I am going to find a man in this kingdom, a man after my own heart, and I'm going to anoint him to be the next king of Israel. The only problem was Saul was not willing to let go of his position. He felt like he had earned it, he had deserved it, that it was rightfully his. Now, Saul had a son named Jonathan. If you're following along in the story, you notice David says, is there still anyone left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? So God anointed David to become the new king of Israel while Saul was still king and his son Jonathan was heir to the throne. Now, we can't go through the whole story of the Old Testament. You know, David killed Goliath, Jonathan and David became best buds. There's this whole moment that happened there. And so, now Jonathan and David are best friends. Jonathan understands that David has been called by God to replace him, and Saul is doing everything he can to hold on to his power and his position. Everybody with me so far? And so eventually what happens is both Saul and Jonathan are killed in battle. And David rises up and he becomes the next king, first of Judah and then 7 years later of all of Israel. And for the next several years, David is fighting battle after battle after battle, and God is giving him victory after victory after victory. And finally, after defeating all the enemies of Israel for a period, they came into a period of peace and prosperity, a peace of rest. And it's in that place of peace that we find David in 2 Samuel chapter 9, and he remembers, now that the battles have been fought, now that they have a moment to rest, I remember the covenant I made with Jonathan. I remember the promise I made to Jonathan, my best friend who knew that God had appointed me and anointed me to be the next king of Israel. And we actually read about this promise made in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 14 through 15. Jonathan says this, if I'm still alive. Hey, that's some foresight right there. If I'm still alive, once you become king, show me the steadfast love of the Lord that I may not die. And do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever. When the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. Jonathan knew what God was going to do in David's life. He said, when this happens, will you remember me? Will you remember my family? And so David asked, is there anyone, anybody left of the house of Saul that I may show kindness to for Jonathan's sake? And there is someone left. Ziba says there's a man in Lodabar. He's a cripple. He cannot walk, but he's a son of Jonathan, a man by the name of, you ready for it? Mephibosheth. Come on. His mama must have loved him. I don't know what are you doing? Mephibosheth, you can't even say it right. Feels like I got a lisp every time I say his name. His name was Mephibosheth. And so David calls and sends for Mephibosheth. I can't even say it. We'll call him Meb. My man Meb. For Mephibosheth. Now here's what you need to know about Mephibosheth. In 2 Samuel chapter 4, y'all gonna laugh every time I say that, aren't you? In 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 4, this is before David calls for him in chapter 9. It says, Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And as she fled in her haste, he fell, Mephibosheth, he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. And so what happened was the news came to the nurse. Saul, the grandfather who was the king, is dead. Jonathan, your father, who was next in line to the throne, is dead. And she's going, oh my goodness, we got to get out of here. Because what would happen time and time again in this era is that when a king was killed, the victorious king would come in and oftentimes wipe out the entire royal family so he could subjugate the people to his own leadership. And so she said, we got to get Mephibosheth out here. Picks him up, runs away. Something happened. She must have stumbled. She might have tripped. He falls, breaks both his legs. Never to heal properly again. And she takes him to this place called Lodabar. Can you just think about the life of Mephibosheth for a moment? 5 years old, his father and his grandfather are killed. Because of that, he is forced to flee. He's dropped, breaks both of his legs to the point that he'll never be able to walk again. He has to leave his home. He has to leave his land. He now spends his entire existence in hiding, trying to stay under the radar, completely dependent on the generosity of a guy in a place called Lodabar. Lodabar, by the way, means no pasture or nowhere. It's like the middle of nowhere. So he's lost his family. He's lost his position. He's lost his wealth. He's crippled. This child has nothing, and now he's living in exile in the middle of nowhere. Is that a sad scene or what, church? And I think the saddest part about the story of Mephibosheth is it's not because of anything he did. He was 5 years old. All of this tragedy that happened to him, not a single thing that happened to him was his fault. I mean, even the fact that he is crippled wasn't something he did. He wasn't born that way. He didn't do anything. His nurse, the very person who was supposed to be caring for him, damaged him. Hey, church, what do you do when the person who is supposed to care for you hurts you? I think that might be some of your stories here today. Maybe it was your mom. Maybe it was your dad. Maybe it was someone close to you who was supposed to care for you and they actually hurt you. And it has left you feeling broken and worthless and damaged. And it's caused all kinds of issues that you were just trying your best to overcome. And it wasn't your fault. You had no control over it. And yet here you are, just trying to overcome something you had no control over. You know, I think we often read stories in the Bible. Our natural tendency is to put ourselves in the shoes of the main character. or to think of ourselves as like the hero of the story. And I think we read this story of Mephibosheth and we think, yeah, let's be like David. Let's be like David, who's going to show kindness to this guy. And let's demonstrate, like, oh man, we can look out for people. And there will be an application for that at the end of this message. But what I want to say from the get-go is when it comes to this story, church, you and I, we are not King David. We are all Mephibosheth. Because the Bible actually makes it very clear in Romans chapter 3, verse 23. It says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. In other words, every single one of us is broken because of our sin. In other words, every single one of us is unworthy because of our sin. None of us are deserving of the King's favor and the King's kindness and the King's love. All of us deserve an eternity separated from God because of the sin in our lives, and every single one of us have it. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And yet, just as David sins for Mephibosheth, I want you to understand today, if you're taking notes, do me a favor and write this down. Even if you're not taking notes, write this down. It's the big idea of the message. So you have been invited to the table of the King. And it is the greatest invitation you will ever be extended. You and I have been invited to the table of the King. Let's keep reading 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 5. It says, then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel at Lodabar. And Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and paid homage. And David said, Mephibosheth. And he answered, behold, I'm your servant. And David said to him, do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. Now, I want to point this out. There is a reason David had to tell Mephibosheth not to fear. And the reason he had to tell him not to fear is because Mephibosheth had every right to be scared for his life. He knows why he had to flee. He had to flee to another land because the practice of the day was to take out the entire royal lineage so that there would be no further threat or claim on the throne. And now here is the new king of Israel who has stepped into the place of his father's family, ruling over all, and now he's being summoned to the king's palace. Wait a second. This might be the end for me. This might be my last day on earth. I know what's going to happen. David is going to take me out so that I don't try to rise up. What am I going to do? I'm crippled. I couldn't do anything if I wanted to. Why is this happening? He comes in the place of fear. David says, do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan, and I will restore to you all the land of Saul, your father, and you shall eat at my table always. Hey, church, can I just point out, David makes 3 offers to Mephibosheth. 3 promises to him. Number 1, he's going to show him kindness. David is going to show him grace, mercy, and favor. The opposite of what would be expected of the new king of Israel. He's going to display it to him. Why? For the sake of the covenant, the promise he made to his dad, Jonathan. Second thing he's going to do is he's going to restore what was lost and taken from him. Mephibosheth was heir to a vast inheritance of wealth in the land. And David says, I'm going to restore to you the lands of your father Saul. And those lands would have made him a very wealthy man. But if that's not enough, David says, and you will eat at my table always. You want to know who eats at the table of the king? His family. So David's looking at Mephibosheth, and if it's not enough for me to show kindness, and if it's not enough for me to restore what was taken from you, I'm going to adopt you into my family. And church, here's what I need you to hear this morning. These are the same offers that God extends to every single one of us. Even in our place of brokenness, even in the place of sin, God looks at us and he says, I love you. I'm going to show kindness to you. I'm going to extend grace and mercy and give you favor upon your life. I'm going to restore to you that which has been taken. I'm going to redeem that which has been lost, and I'm going to adopt you into my family. From now on, you are a son or daughter of the King. This is the offer that God extends to every single one of us. But I want you to notice this. The only reason Mephibosheth was invited to the table was because of who his father was. It had nothing to do with him. He was hiding in Lodabar. David didn't even know him. But because of his father, Jonathan, he extends the invitation. Church, I need you to hear me today. We don't get an invitation to the table of our King because of who we are, but because of who our Father is. If you're taking notes this morning, do me a favor, write this down. The invitation doesn't depend on us, it depends on him. That's the love of God for you and me. That he would extend this invitation even though we're unworthy. Not because of who we are or what we've done or what we deserve, because of who he is. 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 8. So he extends this offer to Mephibosheth, and Mephibosheth, he says this. It says, and he paid homage and said, what is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I? Can you feel that? Like, look at how he's referring to himself. Like, who am I, David? I'm nothing but a dead dog in your presence. And maybe there's some aspect of like, let me just humble myself because I'm just still trying not to get killed right now. Like I don't know exactly what was going on, but I think that there was some truth to the way he viewed himself. Because here he's crippled. That was a big deal. Like it may feel like a big deal today. It was a much bigger deal back then. He wouldn't even be alive if it weren't for the sake of the generosity of the guy in Lodabar. What does he have to offer? He can't do anything. He can't plow the fields. He can't fight in the battles. What can he do? He views himself as a dead dog. I am nothing more than a dead dog. Can I tell you something? This is an insight into how he viewed his identity. And you just need to hear me this morning when I say this. The enemy will try to get you to make your issue your identity. If you're taking notes, you can fill in those blanks. The enemy will try to get you to make your issue your identity, or he'll try to get you to confuse your disability with your identity. And I want you to hear me this morning, church. You are not what you have done, and you are not what has happened to you. See, what God does is he actually takes a broken identity and he replaces it with a better one. Hey, church, you are not a failure. You just need to understand this morning, a failure is an event that happens to you, not who you are. We'll all experience failures. That doesn't make us a failure. You're not an addict. I know that may be controversial. Addiction is a battle you fight, not who you are. You are not defined by what you have done or what has happened to you. We have to understand, yes, we are unworthy, that we don't deserve the grace of God. We don't deserve this new identity. But being unworthy doesn't define our identity. It's what qualifies us to receive the identity that God has for us. Now, if you were worthy, it wouldn't be grace anymore. Because we are unworthy, we get to receive this gift from God. We get to be adopted into his family. And so watch what God does. God takes an identity rooted in brokenness and gives you an identity rooted in his loving kindness. How many of you are grateful that God specializes in using broken and imperfect people to accomplish his purposes? Because that's every single one of us. If you're like, Joe, I don't know, man. Like when you read the Bible, they seem like pretty impressive people. Oh, really? I found this list on the internet. Can I just give you a list of some of the main characters that we hear talked about in the Bible? Come on, Abraham. Y'all remember Abraham? Father Abraham. Had many sons. Y'all don't want me to keep going because it's going to be real bad. Like Abraham, everybody else thought he was too old. Abraham was too old. Sarah, his wife, she was barren. Isaac, their son, was broken by fear. Jacob was a liar and a cheater. Leah was unloved. Joseph was abused and sold into slavery. Job lost everything. Moses had a speech impediment. Rahab was a prostitute. Gideon was afraid. Samson was a womanizer. Naomi was a widow. Ruth was a foreigner. David was an adulterer and then a murderer as he tried to cover up his adultery. Elijah felt suicidal. Jeremiah seemed too young. Jonah ran away from God. Martha worried too much. The Samaritan woman was divorced more than once. Zacchaeus was too small and money hungry. The disciples fell asleep when Jesus needed them most to pray. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Paul was a legalist who persecuted Christians before becoming one, and God used every single one of them. And if he can use them, he can use you. Because God specializes in using broken and imperfect people like you and me. Let's keep going. 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 9. It says, then the king called Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, all that belonged to Saul and to his house I have given to your master's grandson, its restoration. And you and your sons and your servants shall till the land for him, because he can't do it for himself. You shall till the land for him and shall bring in the produce, that your master's grandson may have bread to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall always eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so will your servant do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. And David took his old identity. He says, you're not a cripple. You're not a dead dog. You're a son. Come to my table. Next thing I want to point out is that Mephibosheth, he was not only invited to the table, but then he was seated at the table. And if you can just think about that imagery for a moment, just kind of imagine it in your mind's eye. I don't know how he got there. I don't know if he had some crutches and he walked to the table every day. I don't know if somebody had to pick him up and carry him to the table. But you can imagine that when he finally sat down at the table covered the very thing that had brought him shame all his life. And so when he sat down at that table and he pulled up that chair, now he was seated, and when he looks around, he looks like everybody else. Because the table covered the crippleness of his legs. His brokenness was covered. His shame was covered. He was just like the rest of the sons. The table covered his shame. And church, please hear me when I say this. God does the same for you and I. We're not just invited to his table, but we are seated at his table. And when you are seated at the table of the king, your shame is covered by his table. Your brokenness is covered by his table. Your loss is restored by the kindness of the king whose table you sit at. If you're taking notes this morning, I wrote it down like this. The invitation covers what is shameful and restores what was lost. And at church, one of the greatest gifts of a relationship with Jesus is that God redeems our brokenness. He covers the shame of our past with an invitation to his table, and he restores what the enemy has stolen. Watch this. He takes our weaknesses and makes them an avenue of his strength. Paul actually described it this way in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. He begins to talk about this thorn in his flesh. And he had pleaded with the Lord 3 different times. God, would you just take this thorn out of my side? God, would you please just deliver me of this issue? 3 times he asked God to take it out, and God refuses. And then the Lord speaks to him, and Paul tells what he says. He says in verse 9 of chapter 12, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, somebody say weak, then I am strong. Everybody say strong. Oh, y'all can do better than that, man, at church. Say strong. For when I am weak, then I am strong. This is what God does. He takes our weaknesses and he uses them for his glory. See, your weaknesses are no longer weak when they're submitted to the work of the king. Because in his hands, our weaknesses become opportunities for his glory and power to be put on display. So, Manna Church, let me just say it like this, and we'll wrap up really quick. We have been invited to the table of the King. Not because we deserve it, not because we are worthy of it, but because we are loved. And if we accept this invitation, we are given a new life, we are given a new identity, a redeemed past, and an opportunity to put God's glory on display. What a gift. It is an invitation that will change everything about your life. And as we head into Thanksgiving, and then quickly into Christmas, here's what I want to ask you. So we're seeing ourselves as Mephibosheth. Let's learn something from David. Let's take something from David too. Who can you bring to your table to show them the way to his? There's a story of a gal named Rosaria Butterfield. Rosaria was a professor of English and women's studies at Syracuse University and an outspoken atheist. In the 1990s, after writing an article criticizing Christianity, she received an unexpected letter from a local pastor named Ken Smith. Now, instead of arguing with her, Pastor Ken did something unusual. He invited her to dinner, not to debate, not to lecture her, just to share a meal at his actual kitchen table with his wife, Floyd. Rosaria later said that she only accepted the invitation because she expected a fight and wanted research material. Instead, she found friendship. And for 2 years, she sat at their table regularly, eating meals, asking questions, laughing, watch this, seeing scripture lived, not just taught. And in her memoir, she wrote this powerful line: Ken and Floyd didn't treat me like a project. They treated me like a friend. Their table was my first glimpse at the hospitality of God. And their table opened the door to God's table. And eventually, slowly, through hundreds of conversations, shared meals, and genuine life, Rosaria gave her life to Jesus. She later wrote that the Smiths' table was the place where the impossible started to look possible. Manna Church, God has brought you to his table. Who can you bring to yours to show them the way to his? Let me pray for you this morning. Father, I am reminded again this week of the unmerited, undeserving grace that you extend to every single one of us. God, we're not worthy of the depth of the love that you have for each of us. Lord, for those of us that already know you, God, would you remind us of the depth of that love? Would we not take it for granted, but would you remind us of the joy of our salvation? And God, for those who don't know you, Lord, I am asking in Jesus' name that you would meet them right where they are. And would you cause your love for them to come alive in their hearts today? And Father, for every single one of us, God, would you stir our hearts to love others even as you've loved us, to extend invitations of friendship, of connection, even invitations to the table, that we might point others to the one who has given everything, that we might have new life, a new identity, and the promise of an eternity with him forever. In Jesus' name.